Good afternoon and welcome to The Big Show. Today's edition of The Big Show, of course, where we talk about all things involving Pittsburgh sports and, whatever else seems to be going on in the national scene. Last night, I thought it was interesting watching some of the clips from the big Pat McAfee show. No Aaron Rodgers, but there seemed to be a pretty big crowd there. It looked like there was 16, 17, 18,000, whatever it fits in PPG Paints Arena. It looked like they had a lot of fun. Clearly, it was a night of Pittsburgh's sort of icons. Wiz Khalifa. Snoop Dogg is kind of an adopted Pittsburgh icon. I saw Geno Malkin was there. Letang, Sidney Crosby, Ben Roethlisberger was there, and, of course, Paul Skenes. The one thing I will say, I've seen a bunch of different photos, right, of like Ben, Sidney Crosby, and Paul Skenes. Or there was one, I think it was Ben, Sidney Crosby, Geno, and Paul Skenes. And the caption or whatever that someone said is Pittsburgh legends. I think that probably we need to be a little careful calling Paul Skenes a Pittsburgh legend at this point. Clearly, he could become one. Clearly, he could become a guy, that down the road is, somebody we talk about in the way that we would talk about Ben Roethlisberger and Sidney Crosby. But, I mean, between Crosby and Roethlisberger, you're talking about, what would it be, somewhere in the neighborhood of like 39, 40 years between them, maybe something like that, 38, 39 seasons or something like that. Ben won 2 Super Bowls. Crosby won, 3 Stanley Cups. Probably shouldn't be using the word legend for Paul Skenes yet, just because he's been reasonably good and probably as good as advertised, maybe even a little better so far. The word legend gets thrown around too much. That's not to say that Paul Skenes isn't maybe the best pitcher in baseball. He might be. But he doesn't even have a full season under his belt. So we basically, in my mind, could we do a little better to not necessarily label guys legends before they become legendary? I mean, Ben Roethlisberger obviously is at the very worst. And when I say at the very worst, I mean the very worst. He is the second best quarterback in Steelers history. And there are some that would make the case that even though Bradshaw won the 4 Super Bowls, the fact that Ben did it with different teams, Ben's numbers, all that other good stuff. There are some who would say Ben is even the best quarterback in Steelers history. I'm not one of them. I mean, it's hard for me to say that a guy that won 4 Super Bowls in 6 years isn't the guy that you probably look at and say, they were both incredibly great, but the one that had 4 Super Bowls in 6 years is probably the one that I would say is the best. But my point is, Ben Roethlisberger is probably one of the top 10 or 12 Steelers of all time. And if you're talking about some franchises, that might not mean a whole lot. You're talking about the Steelers, and you think about all of the incredibly great players over the course of time that have been with the Steelers, that's an impressive crowd to be a part of. And so I think that, when you use the word legend for Ben Roethlisberger, at least Pittsburgh legend, at the very least, he's a Pittsburgh legend. Some would say he's an NFL legend if you look at where he's at, on the all-time list for a bunch of different things. Crosby, there is a school of thought that Crosby, might be 3rd or 4th on the all-time list among the greatest players in the NHL in history. I mean, there's no question. There is no question at all that he is, by all accounts, a legend. But let's not call Paul Skenes a legend quite yet. I mean, he's got to win, multiple awards. He's got to win, lead the Pirates to playoffs a few times, all that kind of stuff. then when we start to talk about them, 5, 6, 8, 10 years from now, we can start to use some of those words like that. But nevertheless, it would seem like it was a really good a night in Pittsburgh. It seemed like a lot of people had a lot of a good time. And so when you think about it, that's what happens here in this town. It probably makes it unique. People really seem to love sports here. They seem to love events here. And if you can combine the two where you've got sports and an event, they really, really seem to love it. And I think that's always going to be important. I think that, that kind of an event is the kind of event that we have here. And, although that one was a little special because there were so many people at it, for the most part, I'm sure we could probably duplicate that again, depending on the right people come in and how it's advertised. So kudos to the Pat McAfee show for putting on a thing that apparently a lot of people really enjoyed. I enjoyed some of the clips that I saw. It's not my thing. It's not the kind of thing I would go to, but I know that a lot of people love that kind of stuff. And so I think anytime, we can shed a little bit of positive light on Pittsburgh, especially right now when, we're talking about sports teams that aren't very good. I mean, let's face it. We're in a slump here in Pittsburgh. Someone asked me the other day, do I remember, it ever being this bad? And I would say this. What makes this tough, like even the late 80s, okay, the Pirates were not winning, but they had a team that you knew they were building and they were probably going to have one good run, at a couple of years of success, which they did in the early 90s. The Penguins weren't Stanley Cup good yet, but they had Mary Lemieux. And because they had Mary Lemieux, you knew it was a matter of time. The Steelers, obviously, Chuck Noll era was coming to an end. Maybe there wasn't quite as much optimism for that, but the reality is you had the Pirates and the Penguins were really giving you something to look forward to and giving you reason to be optimistic. I look at this, and I don't know that we have a whole lot to be all that excited about. I don't know that there's a lot of stuff going on with any of our teams where you say, you know what, it stinks right now, but it's going to be good in a few years, and I know this. I don't know. Do you believe that I look, for instance, at the Steelers. Do you believe they're going to be good anytime soon? They don't have a quarterback of the future. They don't seem to have a plan for the quarterback of the future. They don't seem really to have a whole lot of other things that you can hang your hat on, and their best players on defense are old guys. I don't know. What do you think? To me, I look at it this way. I say, hey, at the end of the day, I don't know when the Steelers are going to be really good again. I think they can maintain what they're doing, and if you're okay with that, I guess, you can be okay with what they're doing, but I know most Steeler fans want to see them get back to winning Super Bowls, getting to the Super Bowl, winning playoff games, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Well, you know what? They're just probably not there anytime soon. So if they're not there anytime soon, I mean, what are we really looking forward to? What are we really looking forward to? But again, at least in the late 90s when the Steelers were going through the transition and moving forward, okay, when they were moving forward to moving away from, Chuck Noll, at least you had the Penguins with Mary Lemieux, and the Pirates had Barry Bonds and some young guys like that, and you just kind of knew they were getting better. I mean, they were getting better. And they were improving to the point where you kind of knew the Pirates were going to be pretty good for a stretch, and they were for 3 years in the 90s. And then by the time they were done, the Steelers had become the team that was making runs into the playoffs and all that other stuff. And the Penguins were obviously the team in the NHL. So I think what makes this a little different than maybe some of the other times I could think of where the teams weren't very good is that it's all three of these teams. All three of them. And when you think about it that way, it's not just that they're not very good now, right? I don't know that there's hope of them being very good. I just don't. And I feel like that's where it's going to be, look at it that way. I would say we're closing in on an era that could be, known as one of the worst eras we've had here in sports, probably, since the Steelers got good in the early 70s. The 70s, we were sort of the city of champions. It seemed like all of our teams were good. The 80s were not quite as good, but the reality is, we got Mary Lemieux. And so everybody seems very, very, everyone seems to be, when Mary Lemieux got drafted, everybody kind of knew, boy, we've got an all-timer. And you do got an all-timer. I mean, if you read the lists, and again, everybody has their own opinion, but if you read the lists, you're really talking about Lemieux, Gretzky, Bobby Orr, right? And Gordie Howe, and probably Sidney Crosby. And probably not that far behind, Jaromir Jagr. So, again, I think if you look at what we're doing right now and where we're at, I feel like people probably are not necessarily being or using hyperbole when they say that, this could be the worst time we've had in sports here in this town in a long, long time. I think that's the biggest thing to me. Like, you know what? You might be right. You might be right. And so, anyway, that's a little bit of a tangent to get on, I know. But I just sort of cringed last night when I saw so many people, posting these photos of Skenes and of Skenes and Sidney Crosby and Ben Roethlisberger and saying, oh, here are Pittsburgh legends. I think 2 of the 3 are legends. One has a chance to be a legend, but he's got a lot of work to do and a long way to go. He obviously has the talent, right? He obviously has the talent, but to be a legend, it has to be something that he sustains over a long period of time. And, he just hasn't done that. Now, if you want to tell me Paul Skenes is an LSU legend, okay. But that's different. That's different because he won the World Series, the College World Series there. Basically, he basically is now in a place where, oh my goodness, he, led them to the championship and everything else. He clearly is a guy. He clearly is a guy that I think, they'll hang his shirt and banners and in the rafters and in a baseball stadium and all that stuff at LSU. But he's got a long way to go before we start doing that for him around here. Now, one thing too, I'll tell you that I was thinking about the other day when I was looking at the crowds that were coming into the baseball stadium. I got to be honest with you. It's probably not enough, is it? Probably not enough to just want to say, well, it's not enough to just want to say, well, we have Paul Skenes and he'll be able to sell tickets. I just don't know. I'm looking at, what about the days that he's not going to be, doing it? Like when he's not pitching? Is it going to be enough? I don't think so. I just don't. So I feel like, we talk a lot about all of these, conversations to me. But Paul Skenes is a guy who probably at some point is going to be a legend. At some point is going to be a guy who I think, you're right. He's going to be a guy who we talk about as an all-timer, but he's not that yet. He's just not that yet. Now on to the Steelers. Clearly, there is a storm that's been brewing because TJ Watt went to social media and had like one of these cryptic posts. I don't even know what it is. Seriously. I don't even know what it is, but it shows you how the world has changed so much. A guy puts a post on his social media, and all of a sudden, it's cause for panic in the streets. What that really means is we're in the off season, and because we're in the off season, people need something to talk about. I don't think there is anything. I don't think there's anything at all when it comes to TJ Watt. I don't think there's anything at all that would indicate he's not going to sign a long-term deal with the Steelers. They're going to sign a long-term deal with TJ Watt. It's going to happen. Whether it happens now or right after June 1st or, late in the summer, it's going to happen. It's going to be an extension, probably 2 more years after this one, 3 years total. And it won't shock me if it's one of these deals where he's probably the highest paid player or defensive player or whatever. And I get it. If it were me, I wouldn't do it. I would trade him for a number of reasons. One being, I think if you trade him, you can get a lot for him. 2 being, the last few years, even though he's been healthy, he's worn down and his body's getting beat up. And by the end of the year, he's just not as effective as he is, the first 13, 14 games of the year where he just basically dominates the games. I mean, if I'm the Steelers, and I know that TJ Watt, the problem you have with these kinds of discussions, TJ Watt obviously has, all-time milestones and things that he's chasing. And so, it's hard to do this. But if I'm the Steelers, if I bring him back, even if I pay him a ton of money, the first 10, 12, 13, 14 weeks of the season, what I'm going to do is basically have him on a little bit of a pitch count. I'm going to limit how much he actually plays. Because my thing is, I want him fresh for the playoffs. Like, yeah, it's nice. He's chasing the sack records and all the other stuff and whatever. But at the end of the day, once you get TJ Watt signed, he can't make the argument that, well, I need to play a lot and I need to put up my numbers because the numbers that I am chasing, are going to lead to my next contract. Well, you've already signed him to a big deal. So if you've already signed him to a big deal, that's not a consideration. And after that, you have him. But he's useless if he's beat up by the end of the year. So they've got to figure this out. But all of this panic in the streets because of some cryptic tweet shows you how the world has changed. We look at, Instagram photos and try and figure it out. Guys, unfollow somebody. We try and figure out what it means. All that stuff. It's just really, really a weird thing. I think at the end of the day, nobody really knows what that actually, it was an Instagram post where I think it was like peace out, or some people were trying to read what it meant. I don't think it's that, but I don't think it means anything. He's going to get his deal. They're going to sign him. Now, one of the things that's interesting is the draft's coming up, and we've spent a lot of time worrying about Shedeur Sanders, Cam Ward, Jalen Milroe, blah, 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 all these other guys. And, of course, the elephant in the room, still no sign, knows nothing from Aaron Rodgers. But the draft is coming up. I think it's next week, or what's today, the 12th? So 2 weeks from now. No, today is what? The 10th. So 13 days from now, we'll have the draft. 14 days from now. My math is bad. And everything and to answer your question, no, I wouldn't break the bank. I told you I would actually, for TJ Watt, I would actually trade him. But that's me, and I understand why it's not going to happen. People say, well, he has to finish his career as a Steeler. He has to do this. He has to do that. Okay, maybe. But there's been a lot of guys that the Steelers have said, you need to get on with your life's work. James Harrison, Rod Woodson, Mike Merriweather. There's a number of really good players. And then there's guys like Ben and Troy that the Steelers basically said, you're no longer good. You're no longer good enough for us to warrant that kind of salary. So, to me, I would trade TJ, but that's not going to happen. They're going to sign him. So there's no reason, to belabor the point. There's no reason to get all excited or upset or whatever. I will say this. When I look at the Steelers roster, I know a lot of people want them to draft a quarterback. And to be honest, if it's the right quarterback, maybe. If it's the right quarterback, maybe. If it's not the right quarterback, I have no interest in it. And at that point, I'll be honest with you, it's a team that really should think long and hard about drafting a defensive lineman. Because I don't know that they've done a good job. They've done a pretty good job in a number of other areas, but they haven't done a really good job. Developing, drafting, whatever, defensive linemen. And I think that when you look at a guy like Cam Hayward, yeah, okay, I think he's got a chance to be pretty good for another year or two. But I don't understand, honestly, what you have beyond him. And so I would think that now Omar Khan really has to focus really has to focus on trying to go out and beef up that position specifically. Wouldn't hurt to draft a corner. Wouldn't hurt to draft a receiver either. Wouldn't hurt to draft a corner and a receiver. And you know what? In the third round, if there's a quarterback that makes sense, maybe go get him. But you have to early and maybe often, meaning more than one, you have to go get a defensive lineman because this team desperately needs it. Doesn't have a whole lot beyond, honestly, doesn't have a whole lot beyond Cam Hayward at all. And so there's that. I think it goes with here. It goes to without saying, to me at least, that the Steelers now over the next 14 days have to really start to focus on some of these areas that they need help. And that's where I would tell you defensive line has got to be priority number one, because I think that they probably either neglected it, and if they haven't neglected it, then they basically haven't done a great job, really. They've not done a great job with it. And that's important too. That's really important to know. So it's coming down to, in my mind, this idea that we are sitting here and we're talking about a lot of different things, but when you look at all of the different areas that the Steelers have to fill, defensive line probably has got to be at the top now. They did go out and get a couple of corners, not necessarily guys that are going to be, world beaters, but good enough and probably upgrades over what they had, right? So I think when you look at it from that standpoint, they have to basically now really hone in on it and do the best they can do to go out and figure out how they can beef up that position, because I think that's the position they probably are hurting the most. Elsewhere, Shadur Sanders visited today. And, of course, Shadur Sanders is the son of Deion Sanders. I don't think there's any chance the Steelers are going to be able to draft him. I think he's going to be gone by the time that they try and draft him. But the reality is he's probably good enough that they should take a look at it and think about maybe going up into the top of the draft. I don't know where he fits in terms of some of these other quarterbacks, but it sure feels to me like he's one of your better options. It does feel like that to me. It feels like, he's a guy that, if you think about it, he has a chance probably to be a quarterback in this league for 10, 12, years or more. So I think that's the key to me. When I look at it like this, from that standpoint, I look at it like this, and I say basically it's really important, really, really important to know that if he's their guy, they need to go get him, period. And if that means drafting a bunch of guys and going up further, or spending some more draft capital than you want to, in order to have a quarterback who is your franchise quarterback, you've got to do what it takes to get it done. And so I think that's the key to me. So anyway, game's always on at Archie's. Get down to Archie's. Archie's, home of 80-cent wings, Monday through Thursday. Home of the Paul Zeise grilled cheese sandwich. And, of course, when you get down there, tell Archie I said hello. The Pirates played the Cardinals this weekend, and, they did what they are able to do at times, which is they actually won the series. I think one thing about that series that I would say probably is, is probably interesting is that I think the Cardinals are bad. I think what I saw there is a team that really doesn't necessarily hit the ball very well. They don't seem to hit the ball very well, and they don't seem to be able to move runners over. They're usually Cardinal baseball is, being able to do their thing in terms of having guys, move over, and they manufacture runs and all that other good stuff. I'll be honest with you, I see a team that's going to struggle to score all year long. I mean, they just don't have a whole lot to get excited about. And that's the thing, about the Pirates. They were able to take advantage of it, although they made it a lot harder than they needed to because of the way that they basically hit themselves. But they've got a series coming up in Cincinnati. They're 5-8. They have a chance maybe to take a couple of games from Cincinnati, and then you see what comes after them. I mean, they could get on a little bit of a run. Will they? I don't know. But they could. And that's really all that matters. So, it is one of those things where It's going to be very interesting to see how this plays out for the Pirates. They've already made some roster changes that I like. And, now you've got to sort of, refine the roster and figure out if you can go out and get a couple of guys closer to the trade deadline if you're actually in the hunt. I mean, this has to be a year where if they have a chance to be buyers, they need to go and be buyers for sure. Anyway, hopefully you're having a good Thursday. We will do it again tomorrow. I'll set you up for the weekend tomorrow. We'll talk a little bit more about the Steelers, and hopefully we have a quarterback by tomorrow. Until then, enjoy your day.
Thank you for checking out this content from Post-Gazette Sports. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all of the sports coverage the Post-Gazette has to offer, visit post-gazette.com.